Thank you to everyone who has come in. We have a very exciting day today. So welcome everyone. This event is being hosted by the Honors College, and it counts for Honors College OCC credit. So if you want to go to the app now and see if you can get that counted, you can feel free to do that. And if you're not already involved in the Honors College, there's so many opportunities, and they're open to everyone. So if you're interested in getting more info on that, you can go to the Honors College website and look under Scholar Mentors. And right now, the Honors College is doing some anti-racist research and programming. So we have funding for that. And you can reach out to Holly or Everett for more details. They're going to put their emails in the chat for you. So if you want to reach out to them, you absolutely can. And I want to make note of a few upcoming honors events and deadlines that some of you might be interested in. There's the Frederick and Keefe Awards that provide up to $5,000 for students to pursue unpaid internships in nonprofit and government agencies. So these internships could be with the U.S. Senate, which is a really exciting opportunity. And if you're interested in politics and public policy, that might be something that would interest you. The deadline for that is November 1st, and you can access those through Pitt Fund Me, which you can find on my Pitt homepage. And there's going to be a virtual info session for those awards that's going to take place on October 22nd at 3 p.m. So if you're interested in that event, there's going to be, we can put some information, more information in the chat, or you can visit the website. And then finally, on October 27th, this marks the 2-year anniversary of the Tree of Life tragedy. And we don't have a time yet for the event, but the Honors College is going to have a virtual event on gun violence with professor, author, researcher, and previously incarcerated individual Richard Garland, who is an amazing person and who works on anti-violence initiatives with the city, and the amazing Catherine Fleischner, who also works on reducing gun violence, including police violence. And I'll give a shout out to her work, Not My Generation. If you guys don't know what that is, please look it up. Catherine and so many young people really across the country have been working on that organization, and it's to really reform some of the gun policy and legislation that's out there now. And be sure to follow Pitt Honors on social media. I'm really excited to be here, and my name is Ashley Priori. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a junior, which is very weird because sophomore year really didn't end. And I'm doing English and politics. And I was born and raised in Pittsburgh. And I'm really excited for today's talk because I've always been interested in public policy. I run a nonprofit, Queen's Gambit, and we actually have an event later today at 5 p.m. to celebrate chess in the city. It's free, and I'll put the information in the chat here, but we have some really cool guests, and we'll be talking about how chess can be used as a catalyst for change. And also I want to say that there's another initiative going on right now to get young people on nonprofit boards. So if you're interested in any of those, I'd love to get you connected. And now I'm really excited for this. We have an amazing woman here to talk with us today, and I'm going to turn things over to her. I've been really excited about this app since it first started, and it's so cool that we have this person today. Beam Data is a really cool organization, and they're the makers of the Be the Change app. And the woman we have today, she graduated from Pitt in 2016 with a Bachelor's of Philosophy in International and Area Studies, Sociology, and African Studies. So amazing, all these cool things. And then she went on to get her master's degree from Oxford in International Relations. And I first met her when she was the speaker for Hesselbein Scholars. She gave a presentation to us, and it was super inspiring. and Bahivi Patel is going to be our speaker today. And there's a fun fact. So we both ran for office last year. She ran for county council and I ran for school board. We both didn't win, which which is almost better because we both, that was just an interesting experience. But if either, if any of you have questions about that, there's a Q&A. But I'm going to hand it over to her. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, that's awesome. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining Participatory Democracy Will Be the Change today. And thank you for that very kind introduction, Ashley. I'm really excited for your conference, and I hope that folks will stick around to ask Ashley questions about her experiences and dig a bit deeper into what it feels like to run for elected office. Another big thank you to Pitt Serves and the UHC for making this conversation happen today as a part of Pitt Civic Action Week. As Ashley mentioned, my name is Bhavani Patel, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Beam Data, which is a civic tech startup that's focused on social issues, data, and policy, and how all of those areas sort of intersect with each other. We're also the creators of the Be the Change app, which is a civic action app that helps people take meaningful action on things that they care about in the form of community causes, giving them an opportunity to reflect on issues that matter in their neighborhood. And so, before we dive deeper into a conversation about Be the Change, I'd really like to be intentional about setting the stage for the context of what sort of brings me to this work. As Ashley mentioned, I previously ran for elected office, Allegheny County Council in District 8, as the youngest and the only female candidate. I knocked on doors and talked about a lot of lofty policy ideas that I had, envisioning, the healthier and stronger community that I felt like I could be a part of building if I were elected to this seat. I didn't win the race, and I think that it took me a while to kind of overcome that feeling. Once you put so much heart into trying to achieve a goal and then it doesn't work out the way that you feel, it takes some time, and I took that opportunity to reflect. And I walked away with a lot of lessons and incredible sort of opportunities from that race, even though I didn't win. But what truly, I think, stuck with me the most was sort of the one-on-one conversations I had in the community. I learned a lot about just listening and realizing that people have very real and visceral experiences with their lived environments. Oftentimes, when you dig into these conversations, you'll realize that many people have had homes passed on to them. So they're living in homes that their grandparents lived, and then their mom and dads lived in. It's a similar situation with jobs too. If their parents had worked in a steel mill, oftentimes many of these these members also worked in the steel mills. So in a way, it's kind of powerful because, especially in the Pittsburgh area, especially in the Mon Valley communities where I ran, these communities and these residents are sort of the keepers of socioeconomic transitions, the ups and downs of how their neighborhoods have transitioned and changed over time. They hold these histories. And so I had many conversations that made me uncomfortable. You can kind of see an array of those things here. I disagreed with some people and I agreed with others on a range of topics when it came to things like transportation, economic policy, gentrification, and consolidation of police departments, which was a big thing in the Mon Valley at the time, and still is. And in one particular case, I got into a really long debate about the pros and cons about fracking, and how the debate between environment and joblessness was really a big thing in the Braddock area, and how this person was experiencing that debate in a real life format, right? This was impacting his daily life outcomes. And we ultimately disagreed on sort of the policy approach to it, but I really valued his ideas, and I kind of like started meditating on why that was the case. Like, why was I so surprised that I was learning something from this person? And it's something that's so simplistic, but why wouldn't I be able to learn something from him? He lived through these issues on a daily basis, has a family history of having experienced these things, and likely had a better handle of how his neighbors felt on this issue than me, somebody who's just coming in and learning about these things and seeking to run for office. And I think that each of those, perspectives has a seat at the table, but it's almost as if, how do you connect both approaches? The person who's trying to be a legislator or run for elected office, or maybe the nonprofit founder or the community organizer, and then the other person on the other end who's having these lived real life experiences, being on the receiving side of policy. And so this realization, this reflection after having lost my race was a big turning point for me. And I thought long and hard about this quote by Coretta Scott King. The greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members. People are passionately opinionated about how decisions are made for their communities. Sometimes they're informed on these issues, sometimes they're not. Oftentimes they're just bringing their personal experiences to the table, which should count for something. And I think that we see the reality of this play out most kind of viscerally maybe in terms of social media and how people have started to use social media as a platform to advocate and take action for policy change. Two movements that I can kind of just think off the top of my head, the Me Too movement, which just shed light on sexual harassment, and then Black Lives Matter that shed light on racial injustice and you know the need for police reform. And in that case, we've seen that people have taken to the streets to protest and call for action. And so to kind of contextualize it, there are some really interesting statistics that kind of go with this, right? Roughly half of Black social media users say that these platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, are personally important to them when it comes to expressing their political views or getting involved with issues that they feel are important. Most notably, 36% of Black and 27% of Hispanic communities, that's 36 and 27, say social media are very important for getting elected officials to pay attention to issues, compared with only 19% of white communities saying that. So you can kind of see there's a stark difference in terms of how Black and Hispanic communities are likelier than white communities to describe social media as a very important tool for influencing policy decisions and creating sustained movements for social change. I also want to recognize that, you know, Black and Hispanic, it's sort of an aggregated term. It's not necessarily disaggregating or giving credence to what that terminology means, but for the sake of data for this conversation, I think that that gives you an overall picture of what we're describing here. And so if Black and Hispanic communities particularly feel like social media platforms help them connect with their elected officials, is that really driving change though, right? Do elected officials, nonprofits and foundations and other stakeholders really rely on social media as a means to consistently communicate with their constituents or drive policy? And in some instances, in some movements, that is the case. We've seen that happen with Black Lives Matter and oftentimes Me Too, but there are other issues that sort of get hidden under the rug, and we're not able to get our elected officials' attention to drive that change that we want to see. And so, like I said, I think that this still leaves us with a really important question, which is, how do we create a greater sense of belonging and inclusion, and how can we ensure that conversations like the one I had, and I'm sure many of you have also had in your personal experiences, are integrated into the decision-making process, are sort of the center of policymaking? Because ultimately, when we take a step back, isn't it our community artists, designers, healthcare workers, grocery store workers, urban planners who live in their neighborhoods who are experiencing these things most in terms of being close to these challenges? And so this is really how we arrived at our core philosophy for Be the Change. We built a platform with the understanding that community members are the experts of their neighborhoods, and that it's this sort of expert knowledge that should help drive policy around things like transportation, education, social services, health, land use, and so much more. And one way to kind of think about it is sort of like a more or less, right? What do we want to see more of, and what do we want to see less of when it comes to social media activism and engagement and different digital engagement tools? We realize that without a diversity of voices, policy decisions oftentimes fail to reflect the desires and needs of a city, a county, a state, and ultimately a country. Empowering pathways for local voices to be heard across the board builds power in storytelling. The hard numbers sometimes miss the real world problems of what people really are experiencing on the ground. And I think what we feel most currently maybe is the example of COVID-19, right? We were sort of really shocked by this pandemic and the way that it slowly and very quickly maybe took over our lives here in our local areas, but also ultimately the country. The World Health Organization, the news, they were throwing a lot of numbers at us in terms of lives lost, the rate of infection, the economic downturn. But it's really hard to kind of get a sense of what's actually happening on the ground with just numbers, right? How is COVID-19 actually impacting joblessness how are people experiencing this? How are people experiencing homelessness? How are they experiencing lack of food? I think it's when we dig deeper into these narratives, these real lived experiences, and actually give people the opportunity to tell their stories, that we truly touch what it means to be equitable in our impact. Then we're actually giving a voice to populations that we oftentimes miss, or sometimes populations that fall through the cracks because they're not given a seat at the table. So there is value in capturing these storytelling elements and wrapping that story with the data, which is oftentimes, I think, a missing element. And so the data is oftentimes not connected or useful to drive decision-making or policy. And it's oftentimes also very rarely made accessible to nonprofits and community development corporations who do closely work with government, but because of a lot of funding, lack of funding, it's difficult for nonprofits and community development corporations to do that data-driven work. And so I think it's really critical to think about how limited access to neighborhood level and community generated stories and ideas, their ideas, inhibits the ability to identify local trends about challenges with things like gentrification or even other unique neighborhood characteristics. The collection of this sort of community feedback and local data really creates a pathway for us to collectively reimagine what our lived spaces look like and how we can address the needs of our communities by centering the sort of expert knowledge of people who live in these neighborhoods. And so that's why Be the Change relies on storytelling. We try to center digital engagement and crowdsourcing from people like you to help write the narratives of our local neighborhoods. So we essentially rely on collecting real-time community-generated knowledge to capture how people are experiencing their lived environments. And what makes Be the Change really unique is that we leverage connections to elected representatives as a key way to inspire engagement, right? When you know that there's somebody else that's listening on the other end, you're likelier to want to give your feedback because you feel like your voice matters and that you can actually make an impact. We're not necessarily just focusing on connecting people to government from the broader standpoint. We're really passionate and driven to connect people to their elected representatives because these are the people that we voted for. These are the people who we expect to hear us and drive policy change and vote to represent our needs. And so going back to our original bit about laying the foundation of the problem, social media is oftentimes seen as a tool that is effective in having voices heard, but that rarely is the case when it comes to policymaking in many ways for other daily kind of experiences that we have in our communities. So we took this conversation back to our team and we brainstormed and really thought about how can our team at Be the Change take a subset of what people are experiencing on social media, that sort of value of feeling like they can make policy changes using social media, take a subset of that to another platform and actually more directly make that connection by ensuring elected officials are signing on to Be the Change and really are listening and providing responses, which is something that we oftentimes don't see on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, where if there are certain challenges that are shared on these platforms, we oftentimes, unfortunately, see these conversations divulge into other areas that may not necessarily focus on the initial point of wanting to make an impact or drive policy change. And so just sort of like a technical maybe background of how the app works. When a user downloads Be the Change, which it's currently available in Pennsylvania, we'll be releasing an Android and web-based platform soon. Hopefully, we'll be releasing the web-based platform actually by Tuesday, so we'll follow up through email with all of you. And the Android will hopefully come a week after that. So when a user downloads the app, we request the individual to provide their address or the address of a local community neighborhood center that they feel comfortable with sharing. And based on that address, we'll tell the user who their state representative is and who their state senator are. And then we invite them to share community causes directly with their representatives in the form of legislative feedback. And so that could be, requesting that your state representative or state senator vote in a particular way on a bill, or it could just be sharing feedback on things that you're noticing in your community. Maybe you live in a food desert, or you feel like there's not enough transportation access. The bus doesn't run as frequently. So you should be able to relay those concerns to your elected official. And then if the elected official has signed on with us to use Be the Change, they would get an email notification, and then they would respond to the posts and provide the relevant resources to the person who's shared that community cause. Our vision, sort of thinking in terms of the next 2 months, is obviously to expand the access of the app to different platforms. But we're also working to provide legislative summaries to PA residents to combat challenges that are associated with misinformation, but also to help improve conversations around advocacy and organizing. Right now, it's so difficult to understand how to read a legislative bill. It's very convoluted. The text can be really confusing, and sometimes people don't even know where to go to actually know what's being voted on. So we feel like that information should be better democratized. People should be able to access that in the palm of their hands. We're also very passionate about engaging underrepresented populations who don't necessarily directly engage with the political process, which is why we've really been prioritizing partnering with community-based organizations, nonprofits. So that includes our library system and different organizations here based in Pittsburgh to drive engagement across different demographic groups. And so because we're just getting started, we launched on August 6th and we're still trying to find our footing. These are sort of our immediate goals in terms of building engagement and making sure that we're being as representative as we can and making the tool as accessible as possible. So this approach is important to us because it's essentially rooted in the idea of co-development of policy. The recorded community causes that are in the app are really interpretations of how people see their communities. And all that information is available through a public feed in the app so that neighbors could actually see what's being shared on the app. And in this sense, we're actually democratizing data too in order to inspire bottom-up change. If you're on the app and you notice something and you want to take action on it, you know that this is also something that people in your neighborhood care about, and hopefully that plants a seed for you want to take it a step further and build change on it. The app also intends to invite people to influence the design of their neighborhoods and policies to achieve things like equitable development, environmental justice, racial justice, and much more. We launched in the 43rd State Senatorial District, and thus far we've seen various forms of engagement. The 43rd District does encompass the University of Pittsburgh as well as Carnegie Mellon University. And so, with recent announcements of students returning to campus, we've seen actually students take charge of the app and share concerns around COVID-19 safety and asking questions around how safety would be implemented. Many students have actually already downloaded the app and shared concerns around lack of mental health resources to handle the transition to virtual learning environments, as well as, sharing concerns around people congregating in public spaces without masks. And so in a time where it's so difficult to gather and keep pulse of neighborhood level concerns for an elected official or for nonprofits or any other community leader, we believe that Be the Change fulfills sort of an important gap there by providing a consistent feedback of how people feel about their lived environments. Other individuals have shared concerns with lack of renovations and development support in public housing communities, and they've actually shared photographs of where they're living and the conditions. Some have also asked questions about mail-in voting, which is a big concern, and there are a lot of unanswered questions around that and how PA legislators are ensuring the sanctity of voting. And so when community causes are shared, we encourage users to upvote and downvote to facilitate organizing and advocacy. And as community causes are shared, we're also actively creating community maps that can enable people like urban planners, designers, artists, or other residents to actually get a visual of where issues are being shared and the sort of thoughts and concerns of individual neighborhoods, which you can kind of see an example here in the slide with number 2, what that data visualization tool kind of looks like. And so I kind of already spoke to the current impact that we've had. You can kind of see the different areas and categories that we have had an opportunity to, people have elevated issues around COVID-19, transportation, housing development, environmental issues, disabilities, election day and voting as well. We are currently working with 1 Pennsylvania state senator, and we're going to be onboarding 2 in the next couple of weeks, and then slowly incrementally growing from there and making sure that we're onboarding state senators across the state on both sides, Democrats and Republicans. We're a nonpartisan platform, and we really want to encourage engagement, but also be aware that, it's important to implement safety measures and make sure that people feel comfortable sharing on the app. So we've also taken that into consideration in terms of how we've built the app. And like I said, we've also partnered with a bunch of different nonprofits, community leaders, and elected officials to get to where we are right now. And we're going to keep pushing to build more engagement. Our vision, we're still kind of developing this in terms of getting a sense of what the future holds for us, but it's really important for us to democratize data, making sure that nonprofits and other smaller organizations that are oftentimes resource strapped have access to data, because it's really important to be able to have the stories, the community generated knowledge, this locally based data, to make sure that we're doing equitable distribution of funding, that making sure that voices are heard, and also to ensure that nonprofits are actually having the impact that they intend to have, as opposed to adverse impact. And data and stories can be so valuable in trying to achieve that. Another thing that we're really passionate about and we want to work towards is expanding civic education. So our program fee, we obviously share information and market the app, but we have prioritized using our Instagram feed to share educational materials around different policy issues that are being debated in Allegheny County, sharing resources about voting and things like that. And we want to expand that to different avenues, for example, a YouTube channel and blog, to really build a curriculum around just keeping people updated on different opinions around policy, and to offer people a new viewpoint about what's happening. And then there's a lot of different conversations happening around artificial intelligence and machine learning and natural language processing and all these really cool things that we want to kind of explore and tap into to see how we could use AI for good. Right now it's really difficult, for example, to summarize legislative bills and even to track them. And there's a lot of really cool technology that's being developed to help actually expedite that process, and to make sure that there's not a biased element in that. And so we imagine in the future maybe creating a sense of like an innovation lab where we would invite people to come and work on these really kind of community-based challenges, and thinking about how we could leverage tech for good to better our democracy, and to bring more people into the system. And so that's sort of all I have for today, in terms of just presenting on the app. Take a look at the app, download it at Be the Change. We're currently available in the iOS. So you can find us on the Apple App Store. Like I said, we'll be launching the web-based version hopefully by Tuesday, so we'll follow up via email. And then feel free to stay connected on social media. You can find our handles here. But I'd love to take any questions and sort of open it up to a dialogue to discuss what civic engagement means to all of you, and also answer any questions about the app.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. In here, we'll see if I'm not seeing some chats yet, but I have a question I would love to ask you to sort of get it going. What was it like to make the app itself? Like, that must have been such an interesting and daunting process.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. That's one that I oftentimes get. So it was difficult. It was hard because I don't have a tech background, nor am I like somebody who's trained in data or data science. So being able to kind of be the person, like the middle person who understands sort of like the social implications, like what's going on in the community, what people care about, and building tech around the needs of people. So it's essentially building tech with people as opposed for them. It was difficult to kind of navigate that conversation, because when you're talking to developers, it's a very it's a technically oriented mindset. They're not necessarily rooted in community or social issues. So knowing how to describe the app, visualize it, and actually get the development to happen is one thing, but how do you build something that's user friendly? Things that are not necessarily confusing, something that people can log into and kind of just intuitively get a sense of how to use. We spent a lot of time brainstorming those conversations, and also just doing a lot of market research, having conversations with folks in the community, asking them, what would you want to see in a tool like this? So we spent about a year actually doing all of that before we even went into development, because we wanted to make sure that we were hearing people and building something that they would find value from.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, in terms of being nonpartisan, I mean, it's really interesting too to sort of launch this in Pittsburgh, which is considered a very liberal city. Yeah. And so what was it like sort of reaching out to maybe Republican elected officials and getting them engaged in this? Do you find that it was easier with Democrats, or what was that process like?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I feel like having run for office and kind of being involved in sort of local politics here, it was just easier to sort of approach Democrats to engage them on the app, and to see if they'd be open to something like this. And I feel like I've had some struggle with reaching out to Republicans, but also just being physically located in Allegheny County, it's easier to reach out to Democrats as opposed to Republicans, just from a numbers standpoint. So because we're just getting started, we launched on August 6th. We're going to be focusing on the Allegheny County delegation, trying to get them onboarded sooner, and then hopefully reaching out to other areas and other counties. And that's probably when we'll also tap into more Republican state senators to see if they'd be interested in joining. But I think the true value of a platform like this is whenever you have Democrats and Republicans on the platform responding to their constituents. Otherwise, I mean, I think that we already have enough platforms where one voice kind of overpowers the other. And the goal with this is not to do that, right? It's to find a balance somewhere where we can have constructive dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm curious about the process when you ran for. Oh, here we go. We have a question here. Can you discuss the value of this app for a youth or college student?
Yeah, so I think I briefly kind of talked about it with the example of COVID-19. A lot of students I think when they came back to campus had a lot of unanswered questions just in terms of what would it look like? What would a COVID-19 university environment look like? You know, what were sort of the policies that were being put into place to make sure that they felt safe on campus? And I think an app like this was beneficial in terms of just raising awareness around what was happening on campus and reporting this to their elected officials to let them know what the on the ground reality looked like. But that's one layer of it. But I think a second thing is that college students are oftentimes experiencing a lot of sort of transient environments. They're moving into their communities and coming into new places, and they don't necessarily feel like they're connected to the political sphere. And so the app basically tells you who your state senator and state representative are. So there is an educational component there, but also when you log into the app, you can get a sense of what people are sharing in the community already. Just, you know, you don't necessarily have to be the person that's posting, but just by scrolling, you get a sense of what are people talking about? What are the kinds of issues that people are bringing to light on the app? And that can potentially inspire a community-based research project. It might inspire you to reach out to a particular nonprofit to do some work around that issue. So I think that there is certainly an educational component to the app, in addition to an advocacy lens.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have another question here that Holly asking about. Before the presentation, you mentioned that losing the election was sad. What made you want to run in the first place? And can you talk more about how it felt? And you and I can both talk about this. And I was going into the question I was going to ask you about, you know, your experiences running. I think that because I was so passionate about what I was running for and on, and I was so used to being an intern or being a volunteer on a campaign, being on the other side, that when you're actually the one doing it and you're knocking on doors and you're going through all of these processes like you mentioned, it's sad when it sort of comes to an end, because you put your heart and soul into a campaign and then it's sort of like, well, what's next? But really, like what you've done here with Be the Change, it's you know, I took the reasons for why I ran, wanting youth representation and ensuring that young people have a seat on boards, into something else. But it was definitely a strange experience. What about you?
What was strange about it?
It was strange because I was sort of viewed differently. So people viewed me as an intern or a mentee, someone who was still in training. And I got a lot of, it's not your time yet. Wait your turn.
Like, how would they tell you that though? Like, was it like directly? Like, oh, like it's not. Yeah, okay.
There were a few elected officials that said, you know, I'm so proud of you for running, but you're not going to win, and it's not your time yet. One elected official, younger elected official, actually was like, I had to wait, and I think you should too. It's not the time right now. And when people say, usually, you know, I like people to be direct with me, but sometimes there's a thing about us being like too direct. And on the campaign trail, you would either meet people that were like, I'm so excited, this is so cool, or people who were just like, No.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really interesting. I don't know. I feel like I had similar experience. So when I was running for office, I was getting my footing. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I think I actually had just moved back to Pittsburgh. I had finished my 2 years at Oxford. I hadn't even unpacked my bags and I was asked to run. And I was like, I'm going to do this because I believe in what I'm running on. I see a lot of issues in the community. I'm a woman with an immigrant background. I was born in the States, but like that's a voice that matters in our community. And I just felt really connected to that sort of platform. And I really had to figure out a lot on my own. It was a special election. And so navigating the committees, it wasn't necessarily going to be a public vote. It was just the committees that were going to be determining who the nominee was. And that was a whole nother different challenge because the committees have their own sort of structure and like the way that they like to do things. But to your point about people telling you that it's not your time, I had people tell me that as well. And I think that the inherent reaction to that, sometimes when people who are listening here might think like, oh, like, how can somebody tell you that it's not your time? Like, you're the best person to assess that, you know, that it's kind of, some might think that that's like a demeaning thing because you're young and it's ageist and all sorts of stuff. But now that I kind of sit back and reflect on it, I don't necessarily think I was ready. I think that not winning that race allowed me to fully develop into who I am today. And actually allowed me to realize my potential. I think that had I won that race, that maybe I wouldn't have been able to do the exploring that I was able to do post-election. And I think losing allowed me to dig into questions on a deeper level. It allowed me to take charge of doing something about my platform. Even though I didn't win, I turned it into a company. I built a community around Be the Change. I learned a lot about leadership. I learned a lot about disagreement and how to navigate disagreement. And I think that those are not necessarily skills that I had when I was running. And so I don't know. I think that there is something to be said whenever somebody gives you that advice that it's not your time. It's worth, I think, at least just giving it some thought and seeing like, okay, why would somebody say that to me? What, you know, are they trying to be condescending, or is there a reality to that? Is there a real experience from which they're speaking to that they would say that? And in some ways I'm happy that I lost, actually, now that I think about it, because I think I've been able to create a greater impact doing the work that I'm doing right now, and building this company and kind of nurturing my vision for what community-based policy looks like and how you can build a company that's truly dedicated to innovation, that's rooted in people and community.
I love that. We have two really good questions here. One of them is, do you have advice for women from underrepresented backgrounds who want to make their voices heard and uplift communities?
Wow, that's such a good question. I guess I could speak to how I did it. I mean, I think that it's important to kind of just dip your toes into things that you're curious about, right? So when I was at Pitt, I didn't hesitate to just tap into my LinkedIn and start reaching out to people that I was inspired by, who was doing work that I wanted to do. I would send them an email and I would say, you know, I'm a student, this is what I care about, I have these skills, and I'd really love to learn more about what you are working on. And I think that from a very, when it comes to like tangible thing that you could do, I think skilling up is a big thing, right? Writing your own narrative around, here are the concrete things that I've learned, here are the actions that I've taken based on those skills. I think there's a lot of value to that. Building up your own sort of personal brand about the things that you care about, so people can kind of get a sense of who you are and what your values are, I think is a big thing, especially in the day and age of social media. And so that's kind of like my practical advice, right? To kind of take advantage of digital platforms and build up your brand and reach out to people, have as many conversations as you can with community leaders. And no matter how high up the person is, don't hesitate to send them an email. Never be intimidated by somebody's title. It could be the CEO of a company, but if you're interested in what they're doing and it's genuine and you have good questions for them, send the email. You never know, right? People can disappoint, but simultaneously people can sometimes surprise you. So you should always be open to, I think, the possibilities of that. My sort of more philosophical take on this is, I'm 26, and so like money is something that I have to think about. I have student loans. Like I eventually like don't want to be living at home. I want to be able to be financially independent at some point. But I've come to realize that we live in a society where we're oftentimes, we talk about money as if it's like something that keeps us from our dreams in a sense, right? Like and when I say is like poverty is a reality. There are some people who truly are kept away from accessing certain things because of the limitations of finances. But if you're in a place where you can make a choice to kind of take a risk, where you're not necessarily going to be able to take that high paying job, but you have an opportunity to explore innovation or idea, I feel like the younger you are, the better place you are to actually take that risk and to nurture the things that you care about and to try to find purpose. Because the younger that you are and you find that purpose, it'll serve you longer down the line, I think. I'm still figuring that out, but I feel like that there's something there to be explored, that chasing money maybe isn't necessarily a life fulfilled. That's a very philosophical response. It shouldn't be taken politically because that, you know, that can go down a whole nother thing, but it's worth searching for your purpose and your passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love when you said about emailing people, because, you know, the worst thing they can do is say no, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's so, absolutely. And we have another question here. In an earlier talk, in an earlier talk, you mentioned the narrative of the data and how that relates to the story of the community members' experiences. What are the differences between this way of thinking about data and the technical side of data? And how does each way of thinking about the data influence decision-making and policy development?
What was the first part of the question?
What are the differences between this way of thinking about data and the technical side of data?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. So I like to kind of think about it as like hard data, like in terms of like numbers, which is absolutely incredibly important, right? Like that's truly, so many companies and organizations and important work relies on actual like pattern recognition of how are the numbers rolling. Like that's how we determine our, like how healthy our economy is, healthcare structures, things like that. But I also think that sometimes that's what's missed is doing the important work of capturing sort of like the social elements of it. Like what are people actually feeling on the ground, and how do you intersect hard data with that sort of storytelling element? I think that oftentimes technical people might rule off storytelling as like not real data, but we live in an age now where we have the technology to actually data as if it's real data, like as if it's you're analyzing numerical data. There's tons of AI technology and things that are being developed today by big companies, and they're using text analysis to make money in big corporations. So why can't we apply that to social good? Why can't we apply that same technology to understanding how people feel about racial injustice? What do they want to see in terms of, you know, allocation of funding for education and other community-based resources? And so I think that a lot of people are thinking about this right now, and I think that the conversation is going to become stronger in the next 5 years as the technology becomes more robust, especially when we think about text analysis being able to convert sort of conversations that are happening in different languages, translation services, being able to utilize technology to actually do some of that work. It'll make things more rich, I think, and potentially create a space to integrate sort of numerical hard data with this importance of storytelling and actual community voices and community opinions.
Absolutely. This is great. And one last question that I have for you, and people can feel free if they have any more to put it in here, is, you know, thinking about your experience at Pitt and how that impacted where you are today. Do you have any advice for current students as you look back on your experiences at Pitt? You know, what really impacted you and who you are today, and you know, what advice do you have for students who are here and wanting to make an impact? Which sometimes can feel like, you know, you're a sophomore or junior and it's still a long way away.
Yeah, That's such a good question too. For me, like I loved Pitt. Pitt is where I think I truly like became a person. I think Pitt helped me find my voice, helped me find my leadership skills. And Pitt is also just incredibly supportive when it comes to just the accessibility to advisors, how they want to spend time with you and actually help you carve out a plan of your time at Pitt. I think taking advantage of that is so important, especially the Honors College, like the community-based research fellowship really helped me build relationships in the community outside of Pitt, which is really phenomenal. I think that being at Pitt, it's a good time to kind of take risks in terms of exploring who you are and what you want to do. I mean, I spent the first 2 years as a pre-med student taking really difficult classes with biology and like just chemistry, like all these things. And then I applied for a scholarship to go study abroad in Tanzania and did really incredible healthcare related research on the ground, and came back and realized that I didn't want to be a doctor. And so I continued to pursue that, not necessarily knowing what my plan was, but I had enough support at Pitt because I had those relationships with my advisors and they weren't judging me and calling me crazy for changing my major midway. I got that support. I built up that confidence, went back to Tanzania again, and really kind of found my voice through that. And I had the support to take the risks to do that. And if I hadn't cultivated those relationships with my professors, advisors, and had my friends support, I don't think I necessarily would have done that. But I'm incredibly grateful because it's doing that study abroad, changing my majors that ultimately allowed me to apply for scholarships to go to Oxford. I wouldn't have been able to do it without support financially. So yeah, I mean, I think that really taking advantage of what Pitt has to offer in terms of just cultivating a personality and cultivating a career path, it's truly the best time to do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have a really cool question here from Jess. With the current state of political affairs, we too frequently see division. Can you talk about how you prioritize bringing people together through community engagement?
Yeah, that's the hard one, especially because I think we're living in a very unique political climate that we have never sort of seen in previous times. And I think that we're all still figuring out how to navigate that, especially when it comes to politics, when it comes to the pandemic. These are all new things that we're experiencing. And so for me, like I think listening is certainly something that I go back to, even if I disagree with the person in front of me. I think that there's always something to be learned from each conversation. And to the extent, I'll say this, to the extent that it's not hurting somebody, it's not affecting a person's life outcome, I try to listen. The minute where I feel like it's violent and it has implications that will impact somebody in a physical manner, I think that's we all have a responsibility to step in and do something about that. But again, who gets to draw the line where, you know, sometimes speech can kind of, the way that people talk, the way that people incite hate can also lead to certain things. And so I don't know, I don't want to claim to have an answer on that one. But from a tech standpoint, I can tell you from Be the Change, we've addressed this in the sense that we didn't want to get into the business of moderating people. So we don't allow people to comment on each other's posts on the app. You can only upvote and downvote, and the people that can comment are the elected officials who are responding to the community causes on the app. And that's because we wanted people to feel comfortable that they could post their opinions and thoughts on the app. And if anybody does take the decision to post something that's hateful or spiteful on the app, we have a very serious policy around reporting. And so anybody who feels uncomfortable with that can report the post, and then we would take necessary actions to have that removed. From a personal standpoint, I don't know, I'm still working on that one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you want to share or tell us? This has been such a great talk, and thank you for everyone who's sent so many cool questions.
I'm just really thankful for everybody for joining today. I encourage you to download the app, check it out, to use it. And I'm also going to drop my information in the chat box if anybody wants to reach out. We also do have internship opportunities if anybody's interested in kind of exploring something for the semester. That's my email, and you can also learn more about the app at our website. But yeah, I'm open to having conversations about. And I look forward to connecting with some of you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been so great, and thank you to everyone who joined us. Be the Change is such an amazing app, and I encourage you to download it and really take advantage of some of the resources that were sent in the chat today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.